We bid you welcome. We do not ask what you believe or expect you to think a certain way, but only that you try to live a kindly, helpful life with the dignity proper to a human being. Welcome all who believe that religion is wider than any sect and deeper than any set of opinions. Welcome all who might find in our friendship strength and encouragement for daily living. Good morning and welcome to the Universalist Unitarian Church of Farmington. I am the Reverend Glenn Farley. I'd like to extend a special welcome to any visitors today. All winter after the service, we've been socializing at the back of the meeting house, but I'm happy to announce our Sunday services put together coffee hour outside after the service today. So you're welcome to go out there. It should be warm enough, but it is a little windy, so be mindful of that. When indoors, we are observing pandemic precautions and wearing masks regardless of vaccination status. Religious education classes are being held in the social hall during the service, and an usher can direct you to that location if needed. If you have a joy or a sorrow you'd like to share, you can fill out a blue card and give it to an usher, and it will be read later in the service. You can also text the phone number that's printed in the order of service or come up to the microphone during joys and sorrows. We have some announcements this morning, and I know the membership committee would like to speak to us, so please come up.
Good morning. We are here talking about just a couple things. We are in the process of calling all the members of the church, which we did it last year, doing it this year. We have just about all the volunteers to make calls that we need. A couple more would really help. If you can help, just making, 5, 10 calls, something like that. Check with Hope. And shirts. Thanks all for wearing blue. We look pretty neat. We are taking orders again for shirts. We've been doing it for about the last month. Next week will probably be the end, maybe the week after. But if you if you don't have your blue shirts yet, and you'd like to get them, there's some sheets in the back you can fill out. You can do it online. It's a link on the e-blast, I think. And we'll go on from there. So I think that's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'd like you to join me now in reciting the mission statement of this congregation. It's printed in the order of service, and we can recite it together. We seek answers everywhere, include everyone, and live with compassion. Fire consumes and casts a bright light. May our chalice flame consume our regrets for the past, our fears about the future, and our worries about today. May it light for us a path of joy and peace. This past week, we had in the USA the State of the Union address to Congress, and I would like to share an excerpt from a State of the Union from 81 years ago. It was January 6, 1941, State of the Union address to Congress by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he said the following: "In the future days, which we seek to make more secure, we look forward to a world founded upon 4 essential human freedoms. The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want, which translated into world terms means economic understandings which will secure to every nation a healthy peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. And the fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world terms means a worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and in such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world." This is no vision of a distant millennium. It is a definite basis for a kind of world attainable in our own time and generation. That kind of world is the very antithesis of the so-called New Order of tyranny which the dictators seek to create with the crash of a bomb. Now our time for our musical interlude. Sorry, I messed up. I forgot our opening hymn. I was so excited to share this sermon. Okay, let's do our opening hymn now. It's number 159, This Is My Song, and it's in the gray hymnal. Okay, I'm going to begin my sermon, and I'll find a place for our musical interlude that'll work. I'll do it on the fly. When I was a child, I enjoyed going to the dentist. But it isn't what you think. I didn't really enjoy sitting in the dentist chair, forcing my mouth open as Dr. Weaver polished my teeth with that disgusting, gritty paste, which was supposedly bubblegum flavor, but didn't taste anything like bubblegum to me. What I did enjoy was sitting in the waiting room, because in Dr. Weaver's waiting room, all along the walls were hanging framed Norman Rockwell prints. I found them quite fascinating. To my young eye, I was so impressed with the realism of his illustrations. I loved how he made an ordinary scene somehow extraordinary. I don't know now or then how he did that, but that was the experience I had gazing at his illustrations. My other childhood memory of Rockwell was a poster that hung in the religious education wing of my childhood church, Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church in Bethesda, Maryland. It was the Freedom of Religion illustration, which is in the upper right-hand corner of the cover of your order of service this morning. It has a close-up of it. But the version that was in the RE wing of my childhood church had a message written on it. It stated something like, "The golden rule is common to all the world's religions." And then in the margins of the print listed the world religions with excerpts from the respective sacred texts that mirrored the golden rule, something similar as do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The people in that illustration were so interesting to my child eyes, it made me feel educated and intellectual that I knew about far-flung other religions by staring at that poster. In fact, I had a tender moment when I first walked into the minister's office here at the Farmington church back on September 1st of last year, and that very same framed print was sitting atop the middle bookshelf in the minister's office. The print has a message of what different religious cultures share rather than focusing on what separates us. And it's a message that has stuck with me to the extent I've tried to embody it whenever I've found myself in multi-religious settings I have experienced in my life. This morning, I will share the story of the four freedoms from that reading a moment ago about Roosevelt and Rockwell and their enduring value and their relevance to us today in 2022. In his State of the Union address on January 6, 1941, President Roosevelt delivered that speech designed to rally Americans in defense of liberty, which was desperately threatened at the time. The country had barely emerged from a Great Depression that left millions unemployed. Factories were idle, banks closed, farms abandoned. Across the sea, the Nazis had invaded Czechoslovakia and Poland and then occupied France. Japan had overrun Manchuria. Bullies and dictators were preaching world domination, and in this climate of uncertainty and fear, the president sought to remind his countrymen and women of the fundamental truths on which America had been founded. Truths which would have to become more widespread and eventually universal if the world were to have a future beyond the prospect of chaos and war. It has since become known as the Four Freedoms speech, for in it Roosevelt asserted that in the future days, which we seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon four essential human freedoms. And he laid out those values at stake: freedom of speech and expression, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. He said it was no vision of a distant millennium, but a time for our own time and generation. Interestingly, the public response to that Four Freedom speech was crickets. Congress barely applauded. The next day, most newspapers didn't even mention Four Freedoms. Those who were still talking about the phrase in the weeks and months that followed did so to lambaste it as hollow and empty. The government hired E.B. White and other A-list scribes to drum up some buzz. E.B. White penned immortal lines for spiders and piglets, but the author of Charlotte's Web failed to make Roosevelt's rhetoric come to life. E.B. White's boss called the pamphlet he made for it dull. The Four Freedoms, in the words of one federal administrator, was a flop. But then Norman Rockwell picked up his paintbrush. Rockwell's Four Freedoms, printed in 4 successive issues of the Saturday Evening Post in 1943, instantly hit home. Employing the painter's own very ordinary Vermont neighborhood as subjects, neighborhood and neighbors, the folksy illustrations packed more emotional wallop than Roosevelt's soaring oratory 2 years earlier. Roosevelt's spin doctors has always been perplexed that some wartime sound bites caught on while others did not. Though lacking the poetry of a date which would live in infamy, the Four Freedoms was carefully crafted. Employing catchy alliteration and enumeration, the classic rhetorical device of dividing a big idea into numbered parts. Rockwell, too, had found Roosevelt's formulation to be a snooze. The language was so noble that it stuck in my throat, the painter remembered. Yet as he juggled the idea in his mind, images emerged. He saw a way to help the war effort. Rockwell traveled to Washington in 1942 to propose paintings based on the speech. But officials there, perhaps sick of flogging a dead concept, said there was no money in the budget and suggested that Rockwell illustrate a Marine Corps calisthenics manual instead. Thank goodness for freedom of speech. When Rockwell mentioned his idea to the Saturday Evening Post editors, they readily approved the project. After all, Rockwell was their star cover artist. Only after the magazine published the pictures did the Washington propagandists catch on. The Office of War Information, now being infiltrated by image-savvy, Mad Men-style advertising executives, arranged a 1943-1944 national tour for the paintings, which raised almost $133 million in war bonds, substantially contributing to victory over the fascists in World War II. I plugged that into an inflation calculator, and it's over $2 billion in today's dollars. Millions of reprints of the prints appeared everywhere, inside taxi cabs, on milk bottles, and stuffed inside Americans' monthly bank statements. When the traveling paintings reached a new city, parades shook the streets. Rockwell's scenes gave people something they could remember. The paintings also satisfied America's changing media appetite. Roosevelt had mastered the fireside chat, but the country was increasingly looking to art from Hollywood and beyond. It's still a generation that listens, tuning in by the millions to hear speeches, but the people needed was some understanding of how these ideals applied to their own lives. He wanted to show what we had to protect and what we were fighting for. His series of iconic paintings put flesh and blood on the president's rhetoric to depict what these values meant in the lives of ordinary Americans. He depicted the American day-to-day. For freedom of speech, he drew on a town meeting that he had attended, where the crowd listened respectfully to a lone dissenter. That's the upper left print on your order of service. To nail down the elusive freedom from want, a kind of ideological double negative, Rockwell laid out a Thanksgiving dinner with a turkey so real-looking it's no surprise to learn that he later ate it. He used a real turkey for his model. Rockwell's conjured world is particularly powerful when considered alongside totalitarian art. Hitler used vivid propaganda to vilify Jews and glorify Aryan warriors. The Nazis wanted to show the master race. Rockwell wanted to show the democratic ideal. Our democracy looks much different today. In the 1940s, the United States was almost 90% white, Today, racial minorities make up more than a quarter of our population, and by 2024, the United States will be a minority-majority country. Religious views have also changed. In Rockwell's day, there was still a Protestant consensus, and about 90% of Americans were Christians. Today's spiritual modes are much more varied. Rockwell did make some effort to depict people of different ethnicities and religious backgrounds, which was no small feat in his Vermont town. He reportedly persuaded an Episcopalian neighbor to pose as a Catholic for a day. But his subjects were overwhelmingly white, with men usually in the foreground. Indeed, Rockwell used one white male model, his neighbor Jim Martin, who appears as the father in Freedom from Fear, as a common thread throughout all four paintings. In the more diverse America of today, it's harder to imagine a single figure linking multiple works of patriotic art, or even, for that matter, a single painter who could capture our increasingly complicated ideas of freedom. So, 4 years ago in 2018, the Smithsonian Magazine asked a bunch of contemporary artists to update the series of paintings to the 21st century. This was at the 75th anniversary of when they were first published. Update them with all the wonderful diversity we currently share. And so you can see these if you go to the Smithsonian Magazine website and search for Four Freedoms. It's the first article that pops up. It's very interesting. They're all different styles of art for different artists, and some are provocative, as artists have a tendency to be. Norman Rockwell later said the works were among the most difficult he ever executed. He said they were serious paintings which sucked the energy right out of me, leaving me dazed and thoroughly weary. The Four Freedoms, at least as delineated by Franklin Roosevelt and depicted by Rockwell, are close to being the touchstones of our religious tradition, Unitarian Universalism. Freedom from fear, a renunciation of force as the ultimate arbiter of right and wrong. Freedom from want, envisioning a world where everyone has a seat at the table. Along with freedom to worship and freedom of speech, all are social forms of being, interconnected expressions of our humanity. For there is no Thanksgiving meal without the family there to share the bounty. There is no freedom to speak apart from a responsibility to join with others in conversation and debate about matters of mutual interest. There is no robust freedom of worship apart from the demands and disciplines of congregational life. The world has changed dramatically since 1941, yet much remains the same. The road ahead is difficult. The country at times seems to have lost the compass that guided figures like Roosevelt and Rockwell through times of national trial. But for that very reason, what we do here matters. Community matters, and congregations matter. People assembled to discuss the issues of the day, to pool their resources for the common good, to vote on how their resources get allocated, to elect their own public officials and church trustees, to form the intermediary institutions of civil society between the isolated individual and the overarching power of the state, to exercise the faculty of dissent, to learn how to disagree with their neighbors without attacking them, to build a culture of transparency where meetings are open and records are available for public inspection, and to engage in parliamentary process. All of this matters enormously if the Four Freedoms are to be kept alive. This is our democratic heritage, and this is our faith's promise to the future. Foundational to democracy and to freedom of speech is the concept of the marketplace of ideas, where competing interests and ideas in the public square are eventually argued in such a way that the truth will win out. This may or may not be a true approximation of reality, but in the internet age of social media, Russian bot programs, and Cambridge Analytica, it is beyond strained, I think. To me, the Four Freedoms are almost self-evident, humanitarian values deeply compatible with my religious values. Thus, it was shocking to me when I began researching this topic that the reception to FDR's original speech was crickets. It took Norman Rockwell's illustrations of everyday American life for the people of the 1940s America to get it. I guess I secretly had a wish that the truth is the truth. It doesn't require pretty packaging. But I've come to realize that is hopelessly naive. We must pay attention to the delivery as well as the core message. And I think I'll pause here for a musical interlude and then continue. The Four Freedoms became so influential, they made it into the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I said the Four Freedoms fit so nicely into Unitarian Universalist values, and they really do. Just this past week, I read an article by Bruce Knotts, who's the director of the Unitarian Universalist office at the United Nations. He wrote, "The soaring words in the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights sounded like they were drafted by a Unitarian." They were. Here's the story. The Canadian lawyer and human rights advocate John Peters Humphrey taught law at McGill University before becoming the first director of the UN Division of Human Rights. a position he held from 1946 until 1966. He was asked by Eleanor Roosevelt to author the first draft of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which he did, and then he shepherded the Declaration project through to its completion in 1948. Years ago, when Bruce Knotts spoke at the UU congregation in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, he discovered that John Peters Humphrey was a Unitarian and member of that Winnipeg congregation. And the preamble reads, I'll just read a section of it, but it talks about the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear and want have been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. So the four freedoms made it into that. And furthermore, many commentators have talked about the similarities between today and how the world has changed the past few weeks and the early 1940s. A Washington Post opinion article by Greg Sargent I read a couple days ago talked about President Biden's State of the Union on Tuesday night. And in it, Biden sought to rally the world against Russia's invasion of Ukraine, casting this as another existential battle over the future of democracy. Numerous reporters and commentators have compared this to Franklin Roosevelt's efforts to build the case for an international response to tyranny in 1941. And some commentators suggest it's a hinge in history to compare with other great presidential moments, because the contours of the larger dispute right now are similar. Eric Ronchway, who's the author of several books about the New Deal, said, in the late 1930s and early 40s, the key question was, are you an internationalist in terms of forming alliances with other liberal democracies, or were you a part of the America First movement? It's to argue that there are historical echoes in the broader dispute over how aggressive an international response should be mounted in defense of democracy and against autocracy. We're looking at an expansive nationalist in Putin, and the nationalists in this country are sympathetic to that cause. The people who are rallying against this believe in international institutions and the rule of law. And so towards that end, I'll be showing a video here in the Marge Brown Room on Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. And it's a video of James Luther Adams, who is the greatest Unitarian ethicist and theologian of the 20th century, and he reflects on his travels to Germany in the 1930s during the rise of fascism, and asks the question, how can civil society or institutions or congregations prevent it from ever happening again? That's what I wanted to share. Please join with me in a moment of stillness and silence and prayer. Let me find peace within, so I may be calm throughout. Let me find silence within, so I may find compassion throughout. Let me be reminded that some things are worth waiting for. Let me be reminded that the journey is more important than reaching the destination. Let me see that the non-doing is as much a part of life as the doing. Let me be reminded that it is in these moments of holding on that I can find quiet and renewal. It is within these times of inaction that I can find rest. It is in these times of emptiness that I can become full. May it be so. Amen. We have been warmed by fires we did not build, and we have drunk at wells we did not dig. In gratitude of our many blessings and many needs, this morning's offering for this community will now be received. Will the ushers please come forward? A perfect heart is one that has known love and loss, joy and sorrow. The perfect heart is one that has been shared. As joys and sorrows of our community are shared, please direct your energy, prayers, and meditations as a gift of compassion and strength. I have some joys and sorrows to Thank you for your sharing of joys and sorrows. I invite you to sing our closing hymn, Love Will Guide Us. It's number 131 in the gray hymnal, and we'll sing all 3 verses. No matter how weak or how frightened we may feel, we each have gifts that can make a difference in the world. In the coming weeks, may you do at least one thing to support the broken, to welcome the stranger, to celebrate what is worthy, to do the work of justice and love. Be strong, be connected, go in peace.